The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio. I am your host, Diamond, from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, and joining us today, as always, as usual, my lovely partner and co-host, Leah Shaper.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. We have an amazing show. We're going to be covering a topic that blew up all of a sudden once again, the topic of weather modification. I mean, it's been all over the interwebs, steering hurricanes and thus and such. So we're going to get to the bottom of it in 50 minutes. The first 10 minutes of the show, we're going to talk about a comet visible from Earth for the first time in 80,000 years. And we may go through the ion tail here in just a few days, which we've never experienced in modern history. So for the majority of the show, after we talk about Comet A3, we're going to get into geoengineering and weather modification. We'll talk about all the different types of crazy ideas going on, what actually exists, and then we'll wrap it all up with the chemtrail conspiracy, which I will debunk in 60 seconds and explain what's actually happening in the skies above us. What do you think about that intro?
Well, that'll be a yet again on the debunking of chemtrails. We've done this a few times.
Yet again. Now, the weather modification and geoengineering topic is a sticky one because it makes enemies, it rattles people's nerves, it triggers people. And the main reason is because they're being misinformed.
Yeah. Well, it's a combination of a couple of things, right? Like people are being misinformed, but they are also in a position to not trust anything that's being told to them by authorities about what's actually going on in the world. So I think it puts people in a position where they're particularly susceptible to all kinds of conspiracy theories, whether they are warranted or not, right? Some conspiracies have very good evidence behind them and some of them don't. And I think that a lot of people are having a hard time distinguishing between those two.
Yes, agreed. I'm trying to blur my background here. What do you think?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's always weird when you do that because you get that weird thing around the edges of your image that change.
Yeah, let's start sharing. Let me know when you can see the screen.
I can see it.
So we're talking about a naked eye comet, not just a comet visible from a telescope. It's visible to the naked eye. It's now going to be visible for the next 7 or 8 days. If you look west at sunset, if you can see Venus on the horizon, you'll be able to see this comet to the right of Venus. And throughout the week, it will be rising higher and higher until about the 18th, when the comet will be directly above Venus.
Very cool.
Yeah, I couldn't see it last night, but I didn't get a good vantage point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our Western views are a little bit challenged here, I'll say.
Yeah, because of the continental divide to the west.
Continental divide is to the east, but yeah.
Oh, to the east. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I do that all the time. I mix them up.
But we're in a valley, and so the angle that we're looking at, we did see the aurora last night. First time I've ever seen aurora.
2 nights ago, yeah, that was awesome. That was pretty awesome.
And we'll get to that at the end of the show. So we've got.
When was the last time we had a visible comet? Was it Halley's?
Yeah, probably. No, I think Hale-Bopp and also, they're all just barely visible. It's not like a daylight object, which we really need for the world to go crazy.
Yeah, yeah. That's
something. So this comet will be visible from Earth for the first time in 80,000 years. Some people will think it's a UFO. It is the most anticipated comet of the year, and it is C2023A3, Tsuchinshan-ATLAS. It's kind of like a choo-choo train.
Tsuchinshan-ATLAS.
The pronunciation is choo-choo.
Choo-choo?
Yeah. Tsuchinshan.
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 Well, that makes it a little bit easier.
Tsuchinshan. Like a train. Tsuchinshan. So this is what it looks like, actually. It's not that spectacular, but anything can change with an electric comet with an ion tail.
Yeah.
Now, we're about to have a close encounter with this comet, possibly passing through the ion tail, which is a very rare occurrence. If this does happen, it will show up as a blue streak in the northern hemisphere in the night sky.
Mm.
And so here is, we're looking at the C3 satellite data here. And what you should know, did you just see what just happened there? Watch as this video plays in Radio Land. You'll have to rewatch this on our YouTube channel, Magnetic Reversal News, at 8 p.m. tonight. But watch what happens to the electronics on the satellite. It stalls up here right there because of that X flare.
Yeah.
And the X flare is also what's causing the static on the screen.
This is such cool footage right here.
And there's the ion tail we may go through right there at the very end of the video.
Yeah.
So as it passes by the sun, there's the X flare, there's the interference, there's the computer slows down, and then the ion tail shows up, and that is what we may glance Earth. That's pretty amazing.
Did you see what appears to be like another piece of discharge? Yeah, coming off the front of the comet here. You see that little...
It's oversaturation. So if you look at Mercury behind it, it looks like it has rings.
Yeah.
It's just oversaturation.
Yeah.
And that, in fact, is Mercury there because it just transited with the sun.
Very cool footage.
All right. Anything else to talk about on this comet?
Well, just that we have talked about a few times the idea that comets may actually trigger solar flares when they're nearby, which, if you're at all familiar with electric universe theory, makes quite a bit of sense. If everybody in our solar system and in the universe is electric, then when they come in close proximity, it makes sense that they would interact and have an effect on each other, you know?
Especially if their electrical potential is much different. They're going to discharge to get to a more neutral state. And so it's obvious that this comet, when it came in close proximity to our sun, the sun had been quiet for quite some time. Is it a coincidence that when this comet was at this closest approach to our sun, that all of a sudden we get all these X flares, including an Earth-directed one, and then we get this amazing aurora that went very far south? So correlation is not causation here.
Right. Well, and we've gone over this before, right? We reviewed, I don't remember if it was a paper or an article claiming that sun-diving comets didn't cause flares, that it was just a coincidence when that happened. And I'm like, really?
Yeah, there's a lot of these coincidences happening.
Right.
And so for the big picture, if in fact there was a huge cometary body that broke up in the inner solar system, causing the Younger Dryas event and maybe some earlier events, even the Bowling-Allarod warming, it explains the strange effects during the Younger Dryas. There's an immediate cooling, and then there is a warming. So the cooling effect could be the comets striking Earth, causing the catastrophic melting of the ice sheets, the end of the ice age, but a new mini ice age, right? Because the Earths would be dark for a while. In fact, 1,400 years, the ocean currents would have been shut down. And then the immediate warming, 11.5 or 11.4, would be the remnants of the comet now interacting with the sun, maybe even all diving into the sun, hundreds of pieces. And this huge solar outburst warming the planet. Yep. That's the fairy tale.
The disconnect here between what we're saying and what the typical scientific narrative is in the way that we're looking at the universe, right? We're looking at it from a electric universe perspective, versus the official narrative, which would claim that comets are icy snowballs, which we know they are not. We've seen pictures of them. They are rock. We've landed on them. They are rock. They're not icy snowballs. So how else do you explain the tail of a comet? And one of the ways to do that is through electric universe theory and describing a comet as a rocky body that is electrically charged and is discharging.
And it probably gets a lot of that charge from the initial displacement, because most of these comets appear to be terrestrial. And what I mean by that is pieces of planets. So there's a huge bombardment on a planet, gigantic rocks are shot into space, and then they spend eons moving around. It could also be interactions with other celestial bodies that start to give different charges to these objects. Yeah, so there's all that potential.
Yeah.
All right, we beat that with a dead horse. Now, the most controversial subject, geoengineering and weather modification. There's two types of things going on. So to get it straight, let's get it straight. Geoengineering in the broad sense of climate is called climate engineering. So this isn't chemtrails. This isn't cloud seeding. This is climate engineering, which is something that you do long-term to change the climate. Whereas the other thing we'll talk about is weather modification, like the creation of clouds, steering hurricanes, and all that nonsense. So climate engineering or geoengineering is an umbrella term for both the insane idea of carbon dioxide removal and the other insane idea, solar radiation modification. And this is applied at the planetary scale. What could go wrong? Isn't that?
Yes.
It's insane. We actually have billion-dollar facilities sucking carbon dioxide out of our atmosphere and literally doing nothing, because there's no way you can affect the level of carbon dioxide even if you try to remove it, because the oceans will replace what you remove to keep it in the static pattern that it wants to be in. If you look at the Mauna Loa data of CO2, it's been rising at a steady rate for 100 years. And the reason is because none of that CO2 and the rising CO2 is because of us. It's because the ocean is outgassing more and more to keep the climate situation stable. As temperature rises on Earth, more CO2 is released from the ocean. It's a relationship.
Yes.
So as if temperature drops, a few hundred years later, CO2 will catch up and begin to drop with the temperature.
Yeah. I mean,
so the whole idea of carbon dioxide removal is the biggest scam on Earth and the biggest waste of money.
Yeah. Well, and I've said this in many different respects on this show, but like we barely understand how all of the variables of climate interact with each other and how this balance is maintained. And here we are thinking that this little thing that we're doing, sucking some carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, is going to have any appreciable effect. And of course, like you just said, the Earth is going to respond to that on its own anyway and counteract what we're doing. But it's like throwing a pebble into the ocean. It's so ridiculous, you know? Or to think that we even understand how any minor change that we make like this impacts the system as a whole is ridiculous to me.
Well, and what's more interesting is that there are greenies that are coming out of the woodwork that are saying that the whole concept of removing carbon dioxide is not sustainable. We would need millions of these plants, and the energy. It's cost to run them. It's such an
burning
oxymoron.
Fossil fuels to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And the reason we'd be using fossil fuels to do it is because that's the most efficient way to generate energy other than nuclear. So that's funny. All right. Anyway.
So carbon dioxide removal, the best way to do that is to plant things that eat carbon dioxide, if you really believe that's true. So that's all you got to do is plant stuff. Now, the real worrisome, so there's really nothing worrying about carbon dioxide removal except that it's a waste of billions of dollars. That's about it. If they actually were able to change the amount of carbon dioxide and lower it, if they lower it any, much more, then the whole world goes extinct.
Yeah.
So it's just a stupid idea.
Well, and the worrying part that does exist about carbon dioxide removal is in government policies that restrict people's activity and movement under the guise of removing carbon dioxide. That's the danger. There's not a scientific danger per se. There's a political one, though.
It's always about power and control.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about solar radiation management. Bill Gates is into this stuff. It consists of a bunch of cockamamie ideas, including, but not limited to, marine cloud brightening. And this technique would make clouds brighter, reflecting more sunlight back into space, cooling the earth. I guess you go up there and you put some white dye in the clouds.
Well, or you do it via allowing heavily sulfur laden fuels to create ship tracks, right?
Yeah, but
although
they just
that may
removed
not
those.
even be effective.
They just removed those, and it caused the Atlantic to warm.
So they claim, but we reviewed a paper on that, and we're skeptical about whether that actually had any effect, because at the same time, the total solar irradiance of the sun was increasing. So,
right. So I wonder what would happen if the sun got warmer.
Right. If the sun's outputting more energy, I wonder what happens.
This is not Jewish space lasers, but it sounds pretty awesome. Mirrors in space.
You know,
and this would be satellites that were designed to change the amount of solar radiation that impacts Earth by using mirrors to deflect sunlight somehow.
I don't know the answer to this, but if you think about this, I think the only effective way to actually use mirrors to reflect sunlight out into space would be to completely encircle the Earth with mirrors, right? Because if you remember the slit experiment, let's say you have two barriers here and you shoot light through it. Guess what? You get the same refractory pattern past those barriers that comes through the slit. Then you know what I mean? Like, you're not stopping anything from coming through if there's any gap in those mirrors.
Well, being a farmer, I would say, like, let's just put a big shade screen up there in the atmosphere. And it just follows the Earth with the sun, like a 30% shade. And that way everyone
and I'm
sure
that won't affect life on Earth at all, or, make it dramatically
right. The most dangerous and permanent mistake we could make is stratospheric aerosol injection.
Yeah.
Now, this is a good one to end on here on climate engineering, because it's a great segue to weather modification and the ridiculous chemtrail conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
So stratospheric aerosol injection, which has many startup companies involved, including Bill Gates funding them, is a proposed method to introduce different aerosols up in the stratosphere to create a cooling effect via global dimming or increased albedo up high in the stratosphere, right near the ionosphere. And this occurs naturally with volcanic eruptions, and big eruptions have caused plagues and the death of 50% of life on Earth in recent memory, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've got the Dark Ages, which have a lot to do with a series of volcanic eruptions, darkening the skies for years, causing crop failures. And at this time when these were happening, it's just like today. There are big cities where people relied on production, right? Mm-hmm. And what would happen today if a large VEI-7 eruption occurred near the equator? If it happened near the equator, in a matter of a year, the whole Earth would be dimming. It would be dark.
Yeah. It's funny. One of these articles that you sent me about geoengineering, that's kind of just trying to explain it to the layperson or whatever. They reference the year without a summer, 1816, as a result of the Tambora eruption. And then they're like, so we're basing this idea of stratospheric injection upon what we've seen happen in nature, meaning volcanic eruptions like Tambora. And they're like, oh, well, it was kind of gloomy then, and it inspired, the Frankenstein story and stuff. And it's like, why do you think that people were feeling gloomy? It's because life on Earth was bad. So why do you want to replicate that? Like, what the hell is wrong with you?
Could you imagine what it would do to the tourist industry?
Right. Right. Well, imagine we were able to proceed with some kind of stratospheric injection procedure that was equivalent to like what happened in 536 AD. I mean, half of the world would starve. Like, why are we playing with this? This is so insane.
Here's
I mean,
a good
I don't think that we're
summation.
capable of producing an effect that great at this juncture, but nonetheless, this is a really dumb thing to mess around with because nature has shown us what happens and what the results for life on Earth are.
Yeah, the side effects are too dangerous. Spraying sulfur into the stratosphere might bring down Earth's temperature, but it could also turn the sky white, change weather patterns across the globe, increase the spread of malaria,
Or how about
deplete
bubonic plague?
deplete the ozone layer, and alter the light that plants need to grow. And they don't need Brawndo because it has
Right.
electrolytes.
Right. Well, I mean,
They need sunlight.
And perhaps the most important consideration here, right? We're talking about the stratosphere, right? If you put stuff in the stratosphere, it is not coming down for a really long time. So anything you do, the effects of that will be lasting. And what an insane thing to mess with.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully we never make the mistake of stratospheric aerosol injection.
Yeah.
Now, just to be clear, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of misinformed people on the internet that are saying that stratospheric aerosol injection is the same thing as chemtrails.
Mm-hmm.
So let's set the record straight. These are contrails and they are in the atmosphere. They are not in the stratosphere. You can't spray something in the atmosphere and hope that it gets up into the stratosphere.
Mm-hmm.
So stratospheric aerosol injection and the chemtrail conspiracy is connected, which is the dumbest thing ever. It just shows that the person has no idea what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Period.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So should we debunk? Let me debunk chemtrails.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Right away. This is, the Dane Wigington shot that everyone shows and says, look, they're spraying the skies. And then we'll get to what's actually going on. But before, let's just go through let's just debunk chemtrails. So this chemtrail conspiracy refers to the theory that governments or other parties are engaged in a secret program to add toxic chemicals to the atmosphere from aircraft in a way that forms visible plumes in the sky. So they're not hiding it. That's the first ridiculous thing. And these chemtrails are similar to contrails, except they're bad. And various different motivations for this alleged spraying are speculated by these conspiracy theorists, including sterilizing the earth, reduction of life expectancy of humans, mind control, or weather control. But according to a research group, they have seen no credible evidence that chemtrails exist. They don't see any evidence that governments are endangering their own citizens in the manner alleged in the conspiracy. And this group would be eager to expose and stop any such activities as you and I would.
Mm-hmm.
Now, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. The claim that there is a large-scale secret program to spray materials from aircraft is quite extraordinary. Yet, all the evidence seen to date is weak. The most common claim is simply that aircraft contrails look different now, without any comparative analysis at all. This is as convincing as saying that alien beings walk among us in disguise as people because some people act weird. Now, if there were really a large-scale spraying program dumping material from aircraft at the scale described, there would have to be large-scale operating facilities that manufacture, load, and disperse the material. And if such a program existed at the scale required to explain the number of quote-unquote chemtrails we're seeing, it would require thousands or perhaps tens of thousands of people to pull off. And we would know about it because
And an
they would
extraordinary
be our
amount of money as
friends and
well.
family working there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, well, I should just let you continue. Go ahead.
Well, that basically, in my mind, is, it would be extraordinarily hard to keep such a program secret because it would be so easy for a single individual in the program to reveal it.
Yeah. Well, and then, you can debunk this from the other perspective, which is the explanation for why people are seeing what they're calling chemtrails, what we would call persistent contrails, why people are seeing more of them. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is just simply the increase in the amount of air traffic over the last, let's say, 4 decades, right? The increase in air traffic is absolutely enormous.
It's exponential.
It's exponential, yeah.
There's millions of flights a day.
Right. And then the other part of the explanation is this is the background information that people are missing, which is changes in, let's say, Earth's condition, right? We have a weakened magnetosphere, which means
I want to get to this in the second half. So
Okay.
because that's the whole final part of the show. We're going to come right back to this topic, so hold that on your head. But I first want to talk about other types of weather modification.
But let me just bring up one other thing, though, for the chemtrails, which is
we're going to come back to it.
I know, and I'm not going to talk about contrails right now. I'm mentioning something else because the other part of this, and this is kind of from the perspective that we were approaching this a second ago, is that if the goal was really to poison the population, you have 2 problems. One, why are the people in control of this operation, why are they not wearing gas masks all the time? And 2, there are far more financially efficient methods of doing that, which is to poison the food supply, which it is.
Or the water, which it is.
And also, you can do this through the medical industry, produce a bunch of drugs and convince people that they need to take these when in reality they're destroying their health.
Which
right?
they
But
did.
At the same time, you make money off of it, right? This is there's so many more efficient ways to do such a thing, which you could argue are already being done to go to the extreme lengths that it would be required to do something like create chemtrails that are poisoning everybody.
Well, the final nail in the coffin is that these clouds are in the sky. They don't come to the ground.
Well, that's the other problem. That's the really important aspect of this.
So what are they
stuff
poisoning?
is not going to. It's not going to. If you think your sky is being sprayed today, it's not reaching you. It's never going to get to you. That cloud is going to move and it's going to fall somewhere else, and it'll be a while. It's not happening in the same day that you're seeing.
But clouds don't fall to the ground. They move laterally in the sky.
Right. But I'm just saying, if there's any material that wood does come from that, it's going to fall somewhere else, not where you're standing.
Right. So weather modification has been happening for decades, since the 1940s. It's well known that cloud seeding has been going on the longest. And the technique of cloud seeding has barely changed in 80 years. Mm-hmm. Dubai now uses drones with lasers to force every bit of rain out of clouds, which is a new technique. It's like cloud seeding, but it's called cloud squeezing.
And how do the lasers work? I'm really not clear on this.
I think they denucleate the water that's hanging up there and to make it drop. So it shoots at the water and it falls because it changes the electrical potential. It's being held up there by static electricity.
Right.
Sometimes it dumps when it's super saturated. Yeah. But these clouds aren't super saturated, so the laser feel that way and it drops the water.
Right.
But cloud seeding is controversial. It may or may not do much. Mm-hmm. The farmers in the Midwest that witness it say it does cause the clouds to maintain longer when they do it. Mm-hmm. So it may increase rain 5% or so, mm-hmm. or allow the precipitation to go on longer for a longer distance. But ultimately, it's going to be stealing moisture from another area nearby.
Yeah, you're not creating moisture out of thin air. you know?
It's already there and is not supposed to fall. It's supposed to go somewhere else and fall, and you're making it fall here. So when the cloud gets to the other place, there's no water in it, and that place is dry.
Right. But the silver iodide cloud seeding, isn't that meant to generate clouds rather than cause them to fall, or am I mistaken on that?
You can't use silver iodide unless there's a cloud. There's no way to generate a cloud.
Right. So the silver iodide is
called a cloud machine that's operated from the ground.
Yeah.
But the atmospheric conditions have to already be correct for clouds for the cloud to maintain that they make. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it would cost in a facility to make enough clouds to make rain. I mean, if their experiments showed it would work, we would have that.
Mm-hmm.
Like a big farm would create its own weather.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But by the way, we have a local cloud seeding operation here where we live, which is for the Wolf Creek ski resort. I don't know how effective it is at causing additional snow, but it exists here.
Yeah, there's no way to know if you're getting more. There's just no way to know.
Well, right. There's no way to, this is not an experiment where you can create a control, right? Like there might be some other reason why precipitation is being caused. It may not be what you're doing by trying to cloud seed, and there's really no way to untangle that.
Yeah, so cloud seeding is the attempt to get more precipitation out of already existing clouds through the use of silver iodide rockets, which do not cause chemtrails either. You wouldn't be able to see this going on because the plane flies into the cloud and shoots the rockets.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be invisible from the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's another type of weather modification called storm prevention. Now this began in the 1960s, where they had the great idea of shooting silver iodide at the eye wall of hurricanes to see if they could stop it. But what they found out from all the experiments is that they didn't work, or there was no way to prove that when they shot the rockets in, the results were a result of the silver iodide, because all of the observations in other hurricanes show that they are completely erratic, and they sometimes strengthen for no reason, and they sometimes weaken for no reason. And so they didn't get a consistent result with the silver iodide, and they said it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it. The only other thing is the conspiracy theory of HAARP, that somehow heating the ionosphere, you can steer these storms, right?
Yeah.
And so let's talk about how much energy a hurricane releases. You got the numbers?
I have the numbers. Yeah. So, well, okay, let's start with HAARP. HAARP is currently able to generate 3.6 megawatts, and it's in Alaska. So that's 3.6 million watts. The average, and there's a several different ways to calculate this, so the numbers do vary a good bit, but the numbers are so huge. So the average hurricane, it produces about 6.1 10 to the 14th watts. That's a quadrillion, 6.1 quadrillion watts versus 3.6 million watts. Like, don't forget here, right? A billion is 1,000 millions. A trillion is 1,000 billions. So a quadrillion is 1,000 trillions. That's how exponentially larger the average power of a hurricane is versus HAARP. In another so that calculation also means that an average hurricane is about 200 times the worldwide electrical generating capacity. So how is little HAARP, which is like a micro drop within the worldwide electrical generating capacity, able to impact an energy of that size? I mean, that's ridiculous. Another calculation says that it's about 1.5 times 10 to the 12th watts, right? So that's 1.5 trillion watts. It's still absolutely enormous. That's half the worldwide electrical generating capacity. I mean, these things are a complete and utter mismatch.
Yeah, well, I've got 10 to the 16th in this article and 10 to the 17th.
Well, you're looking at the joules. That's
Yes,
why.
but
Which is not
you
direct, which is not
could
a direct.
control a hurricane if you were able to harness the power generation of the entire Earth at one moment. You may be able to move it a little bit.
Maybe, right. No, that's a good way of putting it into
But how would
perspective.
that's the only way.
Yeah. Yep.
And they're not doing that. That would be a heck of a blackout.
Well, and then there's another problem too, which is location, right? Like HARP is only in one location.
Oh, I heard there's HARPs all over, even underwater.
This came up on Timcast Culture Wars yesterday, with someone claiming that, well, HARP is in Alaska, but they can take advantage of the jet stream. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like you're somehow, I don't know, what's the claim that you're heating the ionosphere over Alaska, and that is somehow being carried by the jet stream, which is at a completely different layer, right? Like the ionosphere and the jet stream have nothing to do with each other. Like what? And then you're somehow directing it to North Carolina or something, and it's like, really?
Right. So HARP probably didn't do it. HARP can create aurora up to 300 miles away in the ionosphere, but for short bursts, and it can't operate for long periods of time.
Yeah.
They did do an experiment, and it caused the ionosphere to glow green and a little red.
Yeah.
But it didn't create the geomagnetic storms that we're seeing. That's another conspiracy theory.
I was like pulling my hair out last night because I was looking at something on Twitter, right? And it's somebody trying to make a thing out of the fact that we just had aurora visible all the way down to the US-Mexico border. Same thing that happened in May. And this is again an example of lacking background information. So people are claiming that because, for all of the time that they've lived on Earth, they've never seen this. That must therefore mean that there's something else going on. There has to be a conspiracy. The government must be doing something. And it's like, there is something else going on, which has to do with what I started mentioning earlier, and we'll get to this, which is that the magnetosphere of Earth is weakening, and so the effect of flares on Earth are greater, and so we're seeing different things because there are actually Earth changes going on. So it's like, it's really frustrating to watch people who have no background information, no education in any of this, jump to conclusions and be absolutely convinced that they're correct without thinking about the fact that that there may be other information that they don't have.
Yeah. So
personally, I think it's really important to do this. Like, if something occurs that you don't understand, I really try hard to do this, right? Because, like, for example, I don't have a background in geology, right? So if something surfaces that seems weird to me, I will typically come to you because you do have a background in geology and say, what am I missing here? Like, what are the other factors that I am not aware of? Because if you're not aware of the factors, you're just not aware. Like, you really have to hold off on your conclusions until you have like a well-rounded bout of information that is relevant to that. That's really frustrating.
So let me break it down. The same reason we're seeing more persistent contrails is the same reason we're seeing aurora down further and further near mid-latitudes. Our magnetic field protects us from dangerous cosmic radiation, which comes from space and our sun. And if you didn't know, the Earth's magnetic field has weakened about 10% over the last 160, 200 years, let's say, 10% weaker. But it's weakening at an exponential rate now because we are in the next magnetic excursion. It says right here, and we also just sent up ESA Swarm, which is a satellite mission to monitor the magnetic field and the magnetosphere of Earth. And the Earth's magnetosphere is weakening at a more rapid pace than most scientists are aware of. It is weakening approximately 10 times faster than predicted. And scientists estimate that the field is now losing 5% of its strength each year.
Which, by the way, that statement can't even be correct. Like, I don't know if you had it handy, but we've looked at a graph of the magnetic field strength over time, a linear graph, which is an exponentially decreasing rate. If the field were losing 5% every year, the curve would be in the opposite direction.
Opposite of what?
Like it wouldn't be like this. It would be like this. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, because they're talking about the remaining field is reducing at that rate.
Right, but if the remaining field is smaller next year, then the 5% is also smaller.
Yeah, every year. Yeah, so they just gave one number. All they're trying to say is that what they did say is 10 times faster than they thought, which was 10% in the last 200 years. So if we're now moving 10 times faster, that means we're going to lose another 10% in 10 years. That is terrifying. And that explains we're going to get 10% more, maybe 100% more cosmic rays.
Yes.
Yeah, because you could see this, we've gone vertical here down in the magnetic field strength beginning just a few hundred years ago.
Yeah.
And it's probably even further down. We're probably approaching levels during the Younger Dryas times.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what that does is it creates clouds. And if you don't know about the work of Heinrich Svensmark, in 2001, he published the paper Atmospheric Ionization and Cloud Radiative Forcing, where he made a direct connection between increased cosmic rays and cloud nucleation.
Which, if you don't know, cosmic rays are ionized elements entering our atmosphere. Those ionized elements allow water vapor to attach to those ions, creating clouds, which is why these contrails that you might have seen 30 years ago or not seen 30 years ago, why they sometimes are more persistent than they used to be, because there's literally more cosmic rays in the atmosphere.
It's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
These persistent contrails didn't exist until around 30 years ago when they began showing up, because that's when cosmic rays increased enough and the magnetic field weakened enough for them to show up. CERN went out to debunk Svensmark, and they created the cloud experiment, which proved him right.
Yeah.
And it proved that cosmic rays nucleate clouds in a specific column in our atmosphere between 18,000 and 30,000 feet or so, which is where most of the clouds are, and which is where all of the planes fly. Hello? And the government in the early 2000s, when they were looking at their radar maps, they picked up on the persistent contrails and they were freaking out because they couldn't see the ground as well anymore. And it was a national security threat. So they looked into it and they mapped the types of contrails that exist. And there's 6 of them. You've got classic persistent contrails, compact persistent contrails, loopy persistent contrails, crossing Dane-Wigington contrails. The world is ending. And the intermittent ones, you know, the ones where the pilot forgot to turn it on or off, or he's trying to signal you that he's spraying.
Right.
And then twilight.
Which, as they rightly point out here, is a function of, well, this part of the atmosphere here has more water vapor than this section here versus this section over here, which is why you get this chunky visualization.
That was a hard one to spit out there.
I know.
Chunky.
Trying to find the right words there.
Okay, so, and then there's the big Dane-Wigington fraud. Everyone says he's an expert in chemtrails and he's got all the data. The problem is that Dane-Wigington, over a decade ago, was found to be photoshopping pictures of persistent contrails onto his own photographs. So that's just, if your whole premise is that you're trying to expose something and you're using fraud to expose it, then you're obviously a fraud.
Right. Well, and the other big problem in here in terms of how a lot of people think about this is it's an Occam's razor problem, right? Like if you have a theory or a hypothesis, and then somebody shows you a hole in that hypothesis and says, well, what about this? Like, how do you explain this part of it? Your theory can't explain that. And if you then have to put another hypothesis on top of your hypothesis, it's called an ad hoc hypothesis, to explain it, well, now your theory is becoming rather complicated and ineloquent. And generally speaking, like in an epistemological sense, when you have a theory that is extremely complicated because your original base hypothesis now has holes that require a bunch of other explanations, it's in all likelihood, if your theories become that inelegant, it's not correct. Like, good theories have very good explanatory power all across the board and in a predictive fashion. But if you constantly have to come up with other explanations for the holes in your theory is wrong.
That's a good point. So we've got a great explanation with no holes in it on what's happening. The Earth's magnetic field is rapidly decreasing. It is now at a field strength that has never before been seen on Earth since the Stone Age.
Yeah.
Maybe, let's say, we're equivalent now to 8,000 years ago when the field strength was quite low.
Yeah.
And this means we are now susceptible to more cosmic rays.
Mm-hmm.
And if it gets low enough, like it did back here in the Lechamp, we could force the next mass extinction.
Yeah.
Because go ahead.
I was just going to say it's really funny because
it's not that funny.
No, it's not funny at all. And you sent me an article today talking about the swarm work, and like they're claiming that if we go into magnetic excursion or a reversal, they're claiming, oh, it's not a big deal. It just means that you'll have to relabel your compass. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, we've gone over this in other shows before, all of the potential consequences of very low field strength, which we would have to reach at some point before a reversal, right? Or an excursion. That's the very definition, which means that not only do we have infinitely more cosmic rays coming in, but also we're much more vulnerable to all kinds of UV radiation. This is a huge danger to life on Earth. And the history has shown that. When we go into reversals or excursions, we have mass extinctions again and again and again. So what the heck are they talking about? That, oh, it's not a big deal. There's nothing to worry about. That's such a load of bullshit. It's incredible.
Yeah, what happened right here at this time on Earth 40,000 years ago was the lowest magnetic excursion in human history, and it caused Neanderthals to go extinct.
Yes.
Also, we have huge amounts of evidence that from 43 to 38,000 years ago, everyone was living in caves.
Yes.
And they were painting pictures on those caves.
Yeah.
Because look at what's happening outside. There is a mass extinction of all of these species. They know it's happening. Their people are dying. They're probably going outside during the day and frying in the cosmic radiation, watching plants die. And so we move into caves during this period, and Neanderthal goes extinct.
Yep.
And then when the magnetic field comes back, let's say 35,000 years ago, we get really smart and productive. And we may have then built the pyramids and created cities, and then the formation of Atlantis and all of that, which then gets destroyed again 12,900 years ago during another magnetic excursion and cometary bombardment. Right. What a safe Earth we live on.
Yeah.
But all you'll have to do is reset your compass.
Right.
It's insane.
I was completely just baffled when I saw those statements in that article. Like, wow. I mean, we even reviewed a report from a military personnel that kind of went through a lot of the consequences, particularly to infrastructure of a very low magnetic field. And I mean, that I think we both agreed that that paper didn't even cover the worst of the catastrophes, but it covered quite a lot of it. And the difficulty with coming back from that, I mean, it's like,
So if it's reducing 10 times faster, that's bad news. That means in a few decades, and if it's increasing in speed, they may do another calculation and it may be going faster.
right, right.
So it could be in the next decade or so. Aurora is a normal thing all the time. Anytime the sun shoots out any flare, even an M flare, we get aurora to the equator.
Right, right.
And the whole sky is covered with contrails.
Right. Well, and I think one of the things that we maybe hammered out very recently too is, okay, like a geomagnetic storm perhaps is somewhat dependent on how close is Earth's magnetic state to the magnetic state of the CME coming at us, right? Because last week we had CMEs from an X7.1 and an X9, and we did not really go into geomagnetic storm. But then we had this long duration, what was it, X1.7?
Yeah.
1.9. And we had a very severe G4, arguably even G5 magnetic storm that caused aurora all the way down to the US-Mexico border, right? So I think there's something that needs to be kind of ironed out in there about like what, you know, the difference between those, despite one set of X flares being much stronger than the other.
Well, what the small long duration flare did was push the BZ south. And when that happens, we get big effects as far as geomagnetic storms. The X9, it didn't do anything. It didn't move the BZ. So it didn't have a large magnetic complexity, even though it had plasma. But that doesn't prevent the Earth from still receiving the energy because there was still aurora in the Arctic, even though there wasn't a geomagnetic storm. That's really weird.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So the energy is still coming in, but it's only at the auroral belt that you can see it. And there's no geomagnetic storm on Earth. Well, KP's up at 3 or 4, but there's aurora up in the Arctic.
Well, maybe there is a geomagnetic storm in the Arctic that we're not capturing with our devices.
On one, it could be up to KP 6 or 7 there. Yes, in one of the readings.
Right.
But it's the X1 that brought one of the most spectacular auroral displays ever since the Carrington event.
I was going to say, like,
that is very mind-boggling, and I think some scientists may start looking into this in the mainstream.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting.
Because Dr. Roy Spencer didn't even understand it.
Huh.
He's like, I don't know what's going on. It's not my area of specialty. So I send him the ESA article.
Yeah, yeah.
And he then might be like, wow, I got to look into this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was I going to say a second ago? It'd be interesting to see when the last time we had an X flare at that level that produced a similar effect. And we may not even have that information.
No, there is none. There's no such thing.
It doesn't exist, right? An X 1.9 long duration that caused all of that?
It's 1.7. It wasn't a 1.9.
1.7? Okay.
Yeah.
I keep getting the numbers mixed up.
But there's nothing like that in history. So what we have, the theory that we're proposing here about what's going on with contrails, what's going on with aurora at low latitude, it all has to do with the magnetic field. It's quite obvious. And all we have to do now moving forward is continue to see aurora at low latitudes with small X flares, and that will continue. So at some point, we're going to get aurora to low latitudes with M flares.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we wonder why, we see petroglyphs worldwide that look similar to each other. And I'm guessing this partially has something to do with a period of time on Earth of low magnetic field strength that allowed lots of people to see what are essentially plasma formations in the sky.
Right. And we've been seeing more and more every year, new and different types of aurora. And they have no explanation, but we just explained it for you today.
Interesting times coming ahead on Earth. Find us tonight on Magnetic Reversal News on YouTube at 8 p.m. Mountain Time.
That's boom.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.